most people, I still see it at conferences. I see it in conversations like, oh, it would be nice if there's research that shows that if you farm differently, like healthy soil leads to healthy produce, to healthy gut systems and healthy people, and of course, healthy ecosystems. Because we're also being partly brainwashed by a lot of these headlines saying, oh, organic is exactly the same. It's a scam. It's exactly the same as conventional. Why you're paying more? The interesting thing is look at the full study, which of course the clickbait headlines don't do, then actually the differences are massive. Like a lot of even just plain organic research shows massive differences, let alone if you go beyond that, let alone if you go deep in soil science. And so I think from the beginning was really a question, is there a role for money? Not even saying there is, but simply asking that question. And again, I'm just to emphasize, I'm not saying that the current capitalistic system is ideal, the current financial world is ideal. Absolutely not. But I do see it as a tool. Finance, just like livestock, just like fire, just like plowing even, is a tool that can be used for destruction and has been used. And if we look at most of it, it's been extremely extractive, but that doesn't mean the stored resources in money cannot be used to speed up things. And I know many people that are completely against using it as a tool, engaging with the financial world, because it leads to extraction almost by definition. And so I'm only advocating for, as the regenerative movement, that we have to learn the language. And if we want to, and I think we should, use the tool to our extent, because the next 10 years, we need to put a lot of systems in place. We need to plant a lot of trees. We need to figure out a lot of processing units. We need to figure out a lot of technology. And all of that goes faster with money.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the Organic Guy podcast. This is your home of organic conversations. I'm your host, the Organic Guy, and around here we have conversations on how we can make our food systems to really get to work for us rather than against us. Today, I'm super excited about this podcast episode because this is just one of the episodes that will be part of our special collaborative series that I think we'll be calling the African Regenerative Frontrunners. And to a large extent, gonna be really trying to spotlight some of the African entrepreneurs, dreamers who are doing something within the regenerative space. And it will brought to you in partnership with one of my guests today, who hosts the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast. And it will also be supported by Rootical, which is a regenerative venture studio that is rooted right here in East Africa. So it's going to be really, really interesting to a large extent because you're one of the people really early adapters of podcasting, especially in the area of regenerative and organic and sustainable farming. I remember starting my podcast in, I think, 2020 and looked around, and one of the podcasts that popped out was your podcast. So you have been in like my list of people I want to have on the podcast. So I'm glad it finally happened.
Thank you so much, Brian, for having me and make me blush and put the bar pretty high for this conversation. But I'm super excited to be here and even more importantly, to collaborate on this series, to put a spotlight on some amazing African region entrepreneurs. I'm going to follow your lead because, as you can imagine, I don't know too much about the context. And so that's going to be absolutely neat. We're going to do some interviews together. We're going to do some, let's say, ping pong interviews. No, like where you interview somebody before and I after and the other way around. So it's going to be a lot of both of us in different ways over the next months on two of our podcast channels. And thanks for Hannes Rootical for putting us together and making this possible and happen.
Absolutely. And he's been doing an amazing work back in Uganda in terms of like mentoring a lot more people who are interested in the organic and agroecology space in terms of giving them the right systems that they need to succeed. So super excited about that as well. So there's so many places to start, but you can sort of give us like a little bit of context, how you got into the regenerative space. So what was happening and what led you into the regenerative space?
Yeah, sure. I mean, to start with a few things, I'm not an investor or a big investor in the space, even though the podcast is called Investing in Regenerative Agriculture. I'm also not a farmer. I didn't grow up on a farm. I have no intention to become, let's say, a professional farmer. I love to help out on farms of friends, but don't make me responsible for managing and running a farm. I can take orders, but definitely don't imagine that I can generate orders, let's say. And I grew up in a city center, so I didn't grow up in a farming background or context, but food was always very important and is very important. So my love of agriculture definitely came through good food, as Slow Food likes to say, good, clean, and fair. And that's sort of where it stopped for a while until my entrepreneurial interest was definitely captured by the potential of agriculture through holistic plant grazing in Australia. Very different context than the Netherlands. I'm born in the Netherlands. Very different circumstances in terms of weather. But I saw through a distance some of the early people applying holistic managed plant grazing and starting to raise a fund. Started raising an investment fund. And I really got interested in if this makes so much sense. It was one of the first times I saw soil and carbon in the same sentence. It was before Alan Savory was famous and before a lot of those things. Of course, people have been applying those practices for a long time, but it was the first time I saw somebody saying, we're going to raise $160 million US dollars and buy farms and turning them around because we have a practice that works and makes more sense financially and environmentally and health and antibiotics and all of those. And then I was like, why are not more people talking about this? So I reached out to the now late Tony Lovell, who set up SLM Partners, Sustainable Land Management. And we started chatting and I fell deep in the rabbit hole of soil carbon, of grazing, of livestock, and of course discovered that it was connected to almost everything else in agriculture. That's about 15 years ago now. I know now, of course, it's larger than carbon, but let's say the carbon was the entry point for me into the world of entrepreneurship and finance and agriculture.
It's quite interesting because you've done so far over 400 interviews already. So what was the first episode that you did? Can you remember?
Actually, we tried, it's a funny story, we tried to do Tony Lovell as the first one, but internet connectivity where he was somewhere in the bush in the outback of Australia was too bad. So I was still recording just with headphones and I decided, okay, Tony, we need to redo this when you're in a better connectivity space. This was before Starlink and all of those magical services we have now. So it turned out to be Paul McMahon, I think, was one of the first, or I have to look, or no, Julian Raus, sorry, Landlife. So actually the first few, Landlife company, reforestation technology company, the first 10 episodes were purely friends that I could easily reach out to with no intention to publish. Honestly, I think the first 3 or 4 we published at the same time, more or less, because we recorded, edited them myself. And then around Christmas, 9 years ago, we released. And I need to come up with a name. And it was really unplanned. Like if you look back, it seems to make so much sense, but it was completely unplanned. Like none of this was structured. Like, oh, and I'm going to start a podcast. No, I wanted to have conversations with interesting people. And the best excuse I had to be in a room virtually was let's record those conversations. And then people say, okay, of course. If you say, I want to brainstorm about my role in the regenerative space, I'm not an investor, I'm not a fund manager, I'm not a farmer, then people say, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I say, okay, we record. People say yes. So it was mainly an excuse to talk to people, to be very honest.
Yeah, it turned out pretty well, I will say, because you've had amazing guests on and in terms of giving value all this year. So it was very well worth it. I mean, your podcast is literally investing in regenerative agriculture and food. So because I think we are going to use the term regenerative a lot in this podcast. So just give us a little bit of your definition. How do you define regenerative agriculture?
I mean, we can spend a few hours on that or a few days in terms of a conference, but I really like, it's one of the better ones I found, not the best one, but a really good one from Terra Genesis, which is one of the first consultants in this space. Ethan Soloviev used to work there. And many other, let's say, legends. And they have, and I think it captures it enough. Of course, we can argue EARA, the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture, has an interesting one as well. This one I like, and we'll just read it out. Regenerative agriculture is a system of farming principles and practices that increases biodiversity, enriches soils, improves watersheds, and enhances ecosystem services. And I think the list could go on, but I think the important piece is that all of these words are increasing, enriching, improving, and enhancing, and regenerating as well, means it's never done. And I think it's not a binary 0 or 1 that you are, like everybody says, how can I recognize a regenerative farmer? I don't think real regenerative farmers would say they are regenerating a piece of land, an ecosystem, a social system, etc. But they're by definition never done. And that probably encaptures a lot of the spirit that is in the regenerative movement.
Do you think that concept of not having to rest on your roles, there's the continuity part of I'm now a regenerative farmer. Do you think that's a fun part or is it also constraining?
Oh, that's a good question. I think it comes to a humbleness and to an understanding we are part of nature and an understanding of we know very little. Like the most advanced farmers I talk to know much more than they knew 10 years ago, but they also know the world is much bigger than they thought 10 years ago. So the percentage of what they now know, even about potatoes or something relatively quote unquote benign, it's not, is like the universe is so much bigger. And so I think it makes it interesting for entrepreneurial people and interesting for people pushing, like, what's the next boundary? Okay, we figured this piece out. And now what's next? Like, how do I go into activating water? How do I go into frequencies? How do I go to technology that enables? How do I move? So I think for people that are hungry for things, it's definitely liberating. For many others, probably scary because it's never done. And there are no recipes, and it's so context specific, and it's so tricky. And most of the pioneering farmers in this age are still doing R&D. They're still doing research and development, trying to really figure out, because there are no real blueprints. You can look at books from 100 years ago or more, and you can maybe see what people were growing together. Some places you can go back 2,000 years. And so I would mostly saying it's liberating and enabling people to really keep going deeper. Even after 10, 15, 20, 30 years, some people are still learning and still going, pushing the boundaries. And we should be happy for, because they're doing that for us. Eaters, consumers, entrepreneurs, etc. Like, if they are not doing that in a changing climate, we have a problem.
Yeah, we get stuck there and then just seem like this is how it's supposed to be. We're not gonna go any further, and this is how everything's supposed to be. So I think it also helped push that in terms of creating more innovations into the world of agriculture as well. So that's quite interesting. And regenerative is like part of like a bigger sustainable farming system, if you may, because there's a lot of words that I usually use, like organic farming, agroecology. Is there a way like you differentiate between those farming systems, or you just consider them as part of sustainable farming?
I would almost say agroecology is a bit of an umbrella term where some things fit under, and of course has a bigger, and some of the complaints or some of the critiques on regen as well. You can do a very narrow focus, like just soil health, and then you don't look at, and I think we should look at it. You look at the social piece, you look at the injustice piece, you look at land ownership, colonization, etc., etc. But if you talk to some farmers or some companies in regen, is a simple set of practices trying to focus on soil health, etc. Of course, the organic piece is focused on the practices, and in some cases, not all, focus on certification. And so there you see different tensions and different intentions and different outcomes. I don't really care which terms we use, as long as we create a food system that is fit for the future, literally, and it is not now. And many organic farms are not now, and even many regenerative farms aren't, but for sure many conventional ones are not. Like, they're very fragile. They're basically going down in terms of soil fertility, soil life, in terms of social life. They don't have, let's say, next generation stepping in. And so if you agree on if biodiversity is important or not, like, the food system has a massive issue in terms of health and in terms of simple, like, I don't think we can imagine it exists in this form in 20 years. And unless we want some big shocks, which we probably don't, we better go and look for a system that's much more future proof. And I think we know a lot of those pieces already. We know how to grow food while increasing and enriching and all those words I used before, which is a miracle. If you think about it, you can improve the quality of soil while you're harvesting. And it's insane. We don't all use that. And of course, I know why. And so I think there's the terminology, people get into different camps, and you have to absolutely not use a plow. And then people say, yeah, but actually I can do shallow plowing, and I can shallow tillage, and I can actually also improve the soil. I think that's sort of beyond the point. The point is that you're over time improving and be as least input dependent as possible. And of course, reduce and kick out all chemicals as soon as possible, not overnight, because in some contexts that might be leading to huge issues. And it needs to be health and nutrition focused. It needs to be outcome focused. We need to be able to report on the increase of biodiversity and ecosystem services and more water and clean water. We should be able to drink it again. And so that's the direction, and how we exactly call that. Plus the whole social piece, let's again not forget that. I don't really care. And people are like, let's come up with a perfect definition, because then we can actually do, yeah, maybe it works in some contexts, but probably not everywhere. So let's not focus too much on that, because we'll just get distracted.
Definitely, I do agree. And in terms of like regenerative itself, if you look at the word itself, to regenerate, sort of like to restore. The thing that excites me about regenerative is like it helps us ask the right kind of questions, right? So for example, we talk about regenerative, it's giving us a preconcept that there was something that was better before it was sort of destroyed. So it helps us ask those kind of questions, and it gives us the context of, you know what, maybe our farming system is actually living and we have actually destroyed it. So we have an opportunity to actually restore it to what it used to be. And that's what regenerative is supposed to sort of do to us. And as long as we're moving in that direction of giving it more life and sort of making it more regenerative, then it sort of makes sense that we are moving in the right direction.
Yeah, but can I push back a bit on that? Because I want to prevent, at least in my context, that we go into the, not naive, but thinking too much about the past, that it was perfect in that sense. Like 1 or 2 generations ago, here at least, people were doing backbreaking work on agriculture, and people moved away from that, or tried to move as far away from that kind of. And so I don't want to glorify the past in that sense. I think we need to move forward while looking back very clearly what we can learn from, without making the same mistakes, because agriculture was very hard and is very hard still in many places. And so I'm saying that not only to not glorify it, but also to not fall into the trap where I see many investors and entrepreneurs sort of discarding it because it's something that looks back. And I went, actually, no, it's exciting because we look forward and we learn from the past. Because otherwise we get people, you want to go, everybody has to go back to the land and let's get rid of all the tractors and all the technology and let's do everything by hand again. I'm not saying that at all. I think we're going to use a lot of technology, and we're going to use a lot of robotics, and we're going to use a lot of other machinery, enabling farmers to hold more complexity on the land, while really, really honoring obviously what we have, but also realizing what didn't work there in terms of systems, in terms of patriarchy, in terms of ownership, in terms of for a reason many people quote unquote escaped. But in many farming practices, let's say at least it was better before, even though you could argue that in some cases, like the Romans started 2,000 years ago with plowing, and it's been a long way down since then. So we also need to make a step change. And okay, what does actually a future-proof system looks like in all its aspects, which is a monumental task.
Yes, very, very complex. Just like nature, it's very hard to sort of say, you know what, I've mastered it now. Let's move forward in this direction. So that's gonna be a hard one to do. And since you are very much entrenched in this world of investing, I would like to understand, because part of the regenerative farming system is sort of to see how we can regenerate the soils and the communities, but how do we ensure for someone who wants to invest in regenerative agriculture that they actually get fair returns for the investment? And is that actually a worthy goal to follow?
Super good question, and keeps us busy, or has kept us busy for 400 episodes. I think at the beginning was really a question, is there a role for money? Not even saying there is, but simply asking that question, is there a role for money in this space? And again, I'm just to emphasize, I'm not saying that the current capitalistic system is ideal, the current financial world is ideal, absolutely not. But I do see it as a tool. Finance, just like livestock, just like fire, just like plowing even, is a tool that can be used for destruction and has been used. And if we look at most of it, it's been extremely extractive. But that doesn't mean, let's say, that the stored resources in money cannot be used to speed up things, to plant a lot of agroforestry systems, to purchase material, to scale certain things or replicate things, always with the huge tension that it brings. Like, it is money wants to create more money, almost by definition. That's how we put it together. And I know many people that are completely against using it as a tool, engaging with the financial world, because it leads to extraction almost by definition. But I would be fine with that if we didn't have an emergency on our hand and we have limited time to save a lot of soils and bring them back to life. And in that sense, I think we need to, quote unquote, I think on our video course, we go dance with the devil or dance with this beast, and be very conscious of the tensions there. But if you want to, again, you don't have to, but for entrepreneurial people, money can make things go faster. And how do you raise the right type of money? How do you engage with that? How do you work on steward ownership, like Hannes and Joachim of Rootical do a lot, and also other venture studios? How do you realize its potential? And the same with entrepreneurship. Companies can be extremely extractive, but can also create a lot of wealth, and not just financial wealth. And so I'm only advocating for, as the regenerative movement, that we have to learn the language. Like, how do you engage? And if we want to, and I think we should, use the tool to our extent, because the next 10 years, we need to put a lot of systems in place. We need to plant a lot of trees. We need to figure out a lot of processing units. We need to figure out a lot of technology. And all of that goes faster with money. And yes, it's going to bring a lot of tension, and it's going to be uncomfortable, and it's going to be messy. And I mean, we know what money does, but I don't think we can not use it. And because the extractive agriculture system is extremely good at using money. And so we can ignore it, but I think it would be foolish because there is a role, and we probably should lean in and learn and be careful.
Yeah, definitely. I like the way you put it. Like, money is a tool that we can actually use. So we can't sort of say, hey, this is not what we want to do, but there are other people out there actually using it for the opposite.
And it's an interesting business case. Like, if you look at organic, in many cases, I'm not saying everywhere, but there is revenue, there is money, there are margins. And so why not double click on that? And because it will attract, and that's one of the main points with the podcast, it will attract more entrepreneurial people. If there is a living to be made, I'm not saying let's become a billionaire, absolutely not. But if there is a living to be made, like one of your guys said, how to become a millionaire with farming, like, it will attract more people. You said a lot of young people are looking for ways to get busy and get by. And if we can give them regenerative farming concepts and ways of doing that and markets, then you get a lot more people active in the space, entrepreneurial people, and they will figure out things. They will come up, oh, this technology is missing, this system is missing, it needs to be supplies, it needs to be seeds, it needs to be mango drying, it needs to be, I'm just looking because I saw the cohort of Rootical. And so there's entrepreneurial activity is going to come into a space where there is something to do. So I think the myth of, oh, there's no money in the space is not true, first of all, and is counterproductive, because we need more people. We need more people, entrepreneurial farmers, entrepreneurial cooperatives, entrepreneurial activists, preferably as well, because not enough people are busy with soil at the moment and are thinking about, okay, how do we do this on the next farm and the next one and the next one and the next region? How do we scale this? How do we scale training, etc.? And yeah, the only way to do that is to have an entrepreneurial mindset and figure that out.
Absolutely. And it's quite interesting because you've done like interviews. I mean, I've mentioned again for over 400 interviews so far. That's an enormous number. So I'm trying to think, like, is there a thread? Is there like a common characteristics you're seeing in terms of people who are pioneers or like who have succeeded in terms of getting involved in regenerative agriculture? Is there like something that you're seeing that is common among these people that people want to get into investing space can pick up?
Absolutely. And I think it's being part of a living system, understanding that we are part of a living system. We are part of nature, or whatever platitude you want to use. But that's a very big thing, because it means it makes you realize there's a humbleness in that. Many of these people are very nice people as well. They're very open to sharing, open to do connections as well, if you ask nicely in a normal way. And there's a certain, I don't know, people that realize that we are an important keystone species as humans, but we are not the only one. And we have a huge role in regenerating. Like, we're the first generation that sort of is able to do that with the technology and the money we have and the realization and the sort of public awareness. Like, this is a huge moment or momentum in that sense. And you feel that with people that are doing that. And so I think there's a humbleness, there's an understanding, there's a non-arrogance, that's not a word, but knowing that we don't know a lot. And I think that what we said before as well, like, every week we discover another mycelium type that does amazing things. Every other week we discover almost how we can talk to plants on frequencies. Like, there's so much that we don't know. And of course, indigenous peoples know most of this and live this probably better than knowing. And so there's that humbleness of discovery, the hunger of doing that, and an interesting shareability. Somehow I've yet to meet very annoying people in this space. I mean, there are a few, but like, it's interesting. The first bubble or the first pioneering group is hungry for change and quite nice. So there's some, I think, some lessons there in terms of movement building and yeah, what fits and what doesn't.
Definitely, I can definitely agree with that. I mean, I've also interacted like people in the agroecology and in the organic space here in Kenya. Yeah, those qualities are also very much visible in terms of like the people you interact with. So I guess this sector attracts certain kind of people. The thing is that they are very much working with nature, and they know that nature always sort of humbles them. Like, if you're growing your vegetables, you have to wait like 3 months, or if you're rearing cattle or let's say cows, you have to wait for like 9 months. So it has almost always to humble you and say, you're not going to rush me. I'm going to take my time. And sort of that one over a long period of time also, it makes you say, you know what, I better stay in line with nature as well. So given that, how should we measure success like in this space? Because let's say like there's someone who wants to invest in regenerative agriculture. Is there any particular measurement should they have in terms of like making money or like enabling to regenerate the soil? Is there like any metrics that they should have in mind in terms of if they are going to rate themselves as being success in this regenerative space?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, of course, you have the standard financial metrics in terms of margins, in terms of revenue, in terms of asset builds, etc. And I think what's important to understand from an investor perspective is risk-adjusted return. Like, what's the risk you're running somewhere in other types of agriculture and other sectors compared to regenerative agriculture? I would argue the risk is significantly lower when done well. And so there's an important point always just to make, but the return, yes, but what's the risk like? What's the risk like? Because we often prefer to forget that when we invest in a fancy startup. The risk is that it goes to zero very quickly. And in a farm, you always have the land. Like, there's very different risk return profile. And I think we often just don't look at like even just photosynthesis or potential of turning sunlight into sugars, because that's what we do. Like, every farmer is a sunlight entrepreneur, a solar entrepreneur, turning as much of the free input, sunlight and potentially water, into something else with the least input possible. And I think you can look at, as I think EARA called it, the European Alliance for Regenerative Agriculture, regenerating food productivity, like what's the potential of a place. And it comes to another interesting point. I think we're only at the beginning of understanding what we can actually grow in a landscape, like how much, because we're all sort of suffering from like a baseline syndrome. Like we're used to quite degraded landscapes, at least in the global north, where most of life disappeared, most of social life disappeared, most of animal life disappeared there inside. And most of agriculture life disappeared because it's a monocrop and it's fallow for a big chunk of the year. So we're almost like not used to imagine what could actually grow there if it's a diverse agroforestry system, or a lot of animals, or both, or a lot of intensive vegetables. And many places where I come, people say, but you can only grow two things here. It's sheep and olives. And then people do 44 different types of vegetables. So we're also at the beginning of understanding how much biomass a place can actually grow when managed well. And so how do we capture that? Could be food productivity, like regen food productivity, could be photosynthesis potential we can actually measure now from satellite. Like, how much is a square kilometer or square meter, probably a bit too much, 30 square meters. How much is that turning sunlight into something? And then we can probably get to quite and then you can compare to other similar farms nearby that the same soil type, the same weather, the same climate, but have a very different photosynthesis index, let's say. So they turn less sunlight into it, something useful for us. So I think we're gonna see more metrics like that, like how did you use the potential that a place has, and how did you turn that into biomass and things. And some of the biomass you harvest could be timber, could be food, could be something else. A lot of that goes back in the soil and keeps, let's say, the engine, not to use an engineering term, but keeps it going, because a lot of places need more biomass and need more soil health and need more biodiversity, and a lot of that you can grow, but that requires a different mindset than bringing it from elsewhere. I think then we're also going to look like, how much do you bring from elsewhere in terms of manure or artificial fertilizer or other things, and how much comes from within your farm or within your farming ecosystem, let's say, around you.
Yeah, that's a lot of things to think about. But for like someone who wants to invest, I think maybe it's good for them to just like find for themselves, like, how am I going to measure this? So it has to be like you as an investor and say, what would you like to get from this investment you're getting?
Because in a financial number, you can hide a lot of things. Like you can make numbers say anything you want.
So I'm wondering, because we sort of have this science already, like this evidence, if you may, in terms of like, hey, if we invest in our soils, we're going to grow more nutritious crops, right? We're going to better manage our pests and diseases. So from your perspective, then what do you think that a lot of people don't want to invest in regenerative agriculture? What is keeping people from investing in regen agri?
I think it's still very unknown, or just hasn't landed yet beyond our little bubble. Like most people, I still see it at conferences. I see it in conversations like, oh, it would be nice if there's research that shows that if you farm differently, like healthy soil leads to healthy produce, to healthy gut systems and healthy people, and of course, healthy ecosystems. That science is there. We know it. I mean, we've had some leading scientists on the show. There are books, there are reports, there are peer-reviewed papers, there's stuff coming out every day. None of it is easy, but it's definitely, the link is absolutely clear. But beyond a few percent of the population, I don't think that message has landed yet. So we have to keep repeating, keep getting those people on the show, keep talking, and people, the light bulbs will go on, like, oh, actually, because we've also been partly brainwashed by a lot of these headlines saying, oh, organic is exactly the same. It's a scam. It's exactly the same as conventional. Why you're paying more? The interesting thing is, if you look at a lot of that research, Maybe it's for the macronutrients, it's similar. But if you look at the micronutrients, if you look at the full study, which of course the clickbait headlines don't do, then actually the differences are massive. Like a lot of even just plain organic research shows massive differences, let alone if you go beyond that, let alone if you go deep in soil science and soil health. So I think it's a lot of repeating. It's an interesting moment now. We have a lot of people very aware of health, using wearables and measuring and glucose monitors and all of that. And of course, COVID helped sort of with that to a certain extent. So there's a bigger group that actively searches for nutrient density. I was just on email with one of the leading regen citrus growers in the US, Herb Young, which we had on. By the way, I spent 37 years at Bayer. And then retired and started Regen Citrus. Interesting story. We had him on and he was at John Kemp as well, and just a fascinating character. And the harvest is almost coming, and he sold most of it he pre-sold most of it already because people look for Regen Citrus, and he's one of the only ones that pops up. And he ships all over the country in the US, and people are amazed by the flavor and amazed by all the phytonutrients and everything that's in it. I'm not saying that's a massive market, but for him it's enough to be fine. And so I think the health piece is blocking many people. Feeding the world is one of those others. Like the research is absolutely clear in Europe, in Africa, in Turkey, in the US. If you do these practices well, you outperform, you at least produce the same. And in bad years, you produce way more. And the best ones completely outperform anybody else in terms of simply yield and quality. But still, in many of the conversations, people are like, yeah, that's all fine and cute and interesting and very, very fluffy, very nice. Regen, but how do we feed the world? Like most of the world is fed by smallholder farmers, first of all. And second, if you read the real research and not the ones done on universities, you can see actually that a lot of this productivity is there. But that's a narrative that's very strong, of course, pushed by agrochemical companies because they're to lose here. So I think those two narratives of feeding the world and, oh, it would be nice if there was a health connection, which both of them has been dispelled as myths, they're very strong narratives. And that holds a lot of people back, even if they want to lean in, even if they want to believe. Their peers are all like, oh, but this is just a cute hobby. It can never feed, blah, blah, blah. Or, yeah, there's no difference. Why would you pay a premium?
Yeah, I see that. I think it was the same thing that when organic was starting I think in the 1940s, they were saying like this kind of hippies who have nothing to do and sort of have a huge interest in farming like differently. But I think it's been sort of proven itself over the long term.
And it's not all perfect and rosy. We have to improve a lot. We have to absolutely push for production because we have to feed a lot of people. But we are also absolutely able.
Absolutely. And I also have to ask you this in terms of like what excites you most from a technology point of view, because everybody's talking about AI. I've heard you mention a couple of times in this podcast about photosynthesis, and there's a lot of, technology about like carbon farming and stuff. So what excites you most in terms of like technology that can help us at least accelerate the regenerative farming?
We are probably going to do a series on like deep tech in regeneration. I think it's often overlooked, often in the movement as well. People are very anti-technology. And again, it's a tool, and I understand because it has been mostly extractive, but I don't think we can ignore. And I think it is another one that can enable us to go faster. And specifically, I'm very interested in technology that enables farmers to hold more complexity on their land, which could be virtual fencing. We see some examples in Europe and the US and Australia and New Zealand where you put collars on cows or livestock in general. And you don't have to put fences in, or in many places you can't because it's too steep or the soil is like cement. Basically, you can't get in, or concrete. And with the collars, you draw a line on your phone, and with GPS, it will keep the animals in that line. You can move them 2, 3, 4, 10 times a day if you want to. If you don't want to, of course, you cannot put them too close to the trees because GPS is not that accurate, because for good reasons in terms of, let's say, warfare reasons. But it enables. I was just on a farm last week, and he couldn't have had animals on the land without that, because simply impossible in terms of price and in terms of practicality to get fences in that landscape because it's so hard and so dry. And the animals thrive. They do really well. It's a very sturdy type of cow. But with the virtual fencing, with the collars, they're fine. They can move every day. They can move quite long distances. And it's very interesting to see a landscape because we're used to see the wires and we're used to see the fences. And in this case, he integrates them fully into the grain operation. They eat all the leftover grain crop. If the crop fails and it's too small, they eat everything, which is great. Of course, don't put them close to the almonds because they will eat them as well. But it's that kind of technology, and I know it's difficult to make. And we actually, we have a small investment syndicate. We invested in a few companies. Hardware is not easy. But in this case, it is, it's an enabler that feels almost like magic, and that you can move the cows on your phone, basically. Other things that are very exciting, the remote sensing, we already mentioned that, like using satellite imagery, which are available for all, like the ESA, the European, has an open source database. NASA had one, now it's changing a bit with political climate, but there are a lot of skies in the, like eyes in the sky, sorry, that are looking at every field in quite great detail. Every year they're getting better. And the question is, how do we use that? Like, do we use it to enforce, which of course, tricky for privacy reasons, but if you want to, I don't know, enroll in a carbon farming program and you promise not to plow, yeah, we can see from the sky if you did or not. And if you promise to plant a lot of trees, we can monitor. We are already, like, it's there. Like, the question is more like, are we going to use that? But I think there's another layer in terms of AI and computer learning. Like, when are we starting to ask bigger questions on a landscape level? And can we ask, for instance, what to plant where? What should we plant where and why? Not just on a farm level, which is could be 2 hectares or 200 hectares, 200,000 hectares, but it's still not enough to influence a full watershed. But in a watershed, you can start asking questions now. Okay, what are the best places to grow mangoes and why? And what are the best places to reforest? And what are the best places to bring back a river or to restabilize, to bring back rain? Like, we can literally start doing those kind of modeling. So I'm very excited when I find people that are starting to ask those big questions and using the immense compute power we have now, not just to make funny videos, but actually to ask very big questions. Like, okay, in a region like Kenya, looking at climate modeling for the next 10, 20 years, looking back 10, 20 years, which we can with satellites. What are places where we should focus? What are places which we should intervene first, or we should start looking at in terms of bringing back photosynthesis and life and year-round roots in the ground? And so there, I think, very practical ones like enabling farmers to hold more complexity, and much bigger ones in terms of monitoring, but also starting to ask big questions. Like, if we're going to regenerate large regions, where do we start? And what are the big ones to focus on first? And then, of course, go on the ground and really understand local context, but at least you have a plan. And yeah, we start to see some of that now slowly, like asking big questions. Can we bring back summer rains in this area? And how many trees do we need to bring them back? Which is a crazy sci-fi question, but why not?
Yeah, why not? I mean, I do like the idea of the GPS tracking without fencing. Sounds kind of fancy, but if it cuts costs of let's say fencing like a huge piece of land, that should be interesting and sort of helping farmers. And when you say like tech can be used as a tool, I think that's one of the cases that is actually being used.
And your phone, I mean, is a massive tool. Many have cameras now, and good cameras. AI can read. I mean, you can take pictures of imagine all farmers are tracking their tomato plants, etc., and what pest this is. And there are many systems already answering then, okay, if you put garlic and this and you fermentate it will, you can create your own pesticide, and it's effective against this beetle because it does do this and this. John Kempf just launched their Field Lark, like an AI agronomist, which you can ask a lot of questions. How, like, basically fed on all the knowledge of the team of John. And so those kind of things are like, okay, suddenly you can have a John in your pocket and you can ask and like, okay, what does that mean? And not just ChatGPT, but actually something that knows. And we're going to see the same for diets. Like, if I upload my blood analysis and what should I eat or not eat. And soon enough, I mean, Walmart just announced the grocery store, more than that, the behemoth in the US announced a deal with OpenAI. And soon enough, you can probably have OpenAI or ChatGPT doing your shopping in Walmart. What does it mean for brands? What does it mean for health? Like, I want the most healthy shopping. I don't care which brand it is. That requires so much information and transparency from products that we don't have, just to be clear. So those kind of things are coming and are going to disrupt quite a bit, because I'm not buying the Oreos because my AI agent told me, or actually didn't tell me, just ordered way healthier cookies.
Yeah, that's gonna be interesting. And it's quite of interest because when you look at like the context in this case, like the global north is quite a different than the global south, like first world and third world countries, because now like they have the luxury of using such technologies than like a local farmer here in Africa can't. So I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, do you see whether like there's a difference between the agroecology that is being practiced in the global north and the one in the global south, or like the regenerative philosophy is just a global thing and can be used anywhere?
I think the short answer, I don't know, as I don't know the context well enough to grasp that. My hunch is that it's very, very similar. I think if you put language besides, like, maybe let's say language is not a barrier, we can use whatever to translate. But I think if you put advanced regen farmers of almost anywhere together, they would connect much better than they normally connect to their neighbors in their own context. Could be a huge potato farm from the Netherlands with a 2 hectare farmer in your region in Western Kenya. I think they would have a very interesting conversation, probably more interesting than with their neighbors in general, even though they're completely different cultures and contexts. And because the philosophies are similar. And so that just excites me. I remember David Montgomery, who wrote a book on growing a revolution, basically said he visited from Ghana to Australia, of course, the most different farms, to Costa Rica, etc. And the philosophies were exactly the same. And so that's very interesting. That is a very uniform thought. At the same time, of course, there are massive differences. And we argued before, we discussed as well, it might be easier in many places in the global south because you don't have the huge subsidy barriers and the huge entrance system in terms of agroecology, or in terms of agrochemical, not agroecology. And stuff grows faster many times in the tropics, of course, depends where you are. Like for agroforestry, go to Brazil. Like they have 40, 50 made for, I mean, the Amazon is a managed agroforestry system. There's just so much more knowledge there than we, I mean, we could only dream of catching up if we are in Germany or somewhere. And so, yes, we have some fancy technology and okay internet. Actually, many countryside places, absolutely not. But we also have a massive, massive issue in terms of youth, which simply are not there, in terms of health, in terms of systems that are and maybe even worse, we're absolutely used to a degraded landscape. And I think in many places where that is more recent, like you had your vegetable gardens, maybe in Southern Europe as well, you're much more closer to, you still taste the difference. Like you said, when I went to the city, I tasted the difference in vegetables, and I was like, oh, what's this? This is not how it's supposed to taste. Like if you're born in the city and your parents were as well, probably you're too far away from that to even remember. So I'm not such a fan of the narrative, like we're so advanced, etc. I know the Netherlands always thinks, we are always thinking we're the most advanced agriculture country. I can tell you that's nonsense. And so it's a very interesting movement that pops up on very different places, and potentially, and that's why we're doing this series, like East Africa is a buzzing hub of so much innovation. And if you just look, I remember being in Tanzania, I'm going to say 12 years ago, probably more, and seeing Masai selling cattle through his phone and getting payment for that. And I obviously couldn't do that with my fancy phone. And so there already you see like leapfrogging and technology, and it's definitely not a universal piece.
For sure. And I think, as you say, like the language barrier must be, like the difference. But in terms of like practices, there is a very high correlation between those two sides. So that's always interesting to see. You build one of the biggest media companies, at least in the space of regenerative agriculture. I'm just wondering, like, from your experience, what role do you think, especially for the new media, has in terms of helping amplify the regenerative agriculture?
Our world is shaped by narratives and storytelling. So I don't think we don't invest in it a lot enough. We built one of the biggest media companies, which means 2 people. And so it's just hilarious to see the need for story, not hilarious, like the amount of people moved because of Kiss the Ground, because of movies, because of documentaries. Probably the most impactful thing, or we're funding those, I'm not saying that one, but those in general. And having you doing 70 interviews around organic in East Africa and beyond. I think we can't underestimate how important storytelling is. And we now can reach a global audience. Like we have listeners everywhere around the world, and getting emails from them as well. Please always do get in touch, because it's so amazing to hear when people listen to this. So the narratives and the storytelling and how environmentally sound and healthy and profitable food and agriculture could be, like we can't repeat that enough. And we have been very bad, I think, at conveying that message, and not using these tools as well. And the TikTok, when you're doom scrolling on TikTok or wherever, you should be getting regenerative content. Like the algorithm should, and we haven't been making enough. There's some examples now, people are but like we need to shout it much more in the right places, I think.
Definitely. And it's quite interesting. Like the internet is full of like, you're more likely to meet people who sort of resonate with what you're trying to do. And that's the beauty about internet. And it has like low entry like requirements. Like what you need is just like a microphone and just an idea, and find people who sort of have an interest and start having a conversation. So it has lowered the bar in terms of entry, and that has helped this conversation to keep going.
Which is a danger as well, especially now with AI and regenerative video, etc. Like the amount of slop coming into it's, you can make us speak Spanish in 2 seconds now, and let's see where that goes, and make us say all kinds of things that we'd never said before. So but it's true. I mean, you can find I remember somebody in Brazil getting into agroforestry, creating a separate account on Instagram, starting following a few agroforestry people, started publishing a bit, and basically the algorithm started feeding him other agroforestry people, and within a year he had like the list of people like, okay, now I'm going to visit farms and I'm going to visit these people, because the algorithm made the filter for him, made the selection basically.
Interesting. So I would like to throw this question at you. I think it's a question that you also like to ask, like a lot of guests to come to your podcast as well. So if you had like 1 billion, let's say euros, basically you had an unlimited amount of money and you wanted to invest in regenerative ag, what would you invest on?
Yeah, I always need to expect this question because I've asked it about 400 times now. And I usually consistently gave the same answer. I think 80%, I would like to use an 80-20 rule. And probably that's not the investing piece, but I would try to, as quickly as possible, put it to work with indigenous peoples around the world, which are holding most of the biodiversity. And there's such a critical, of course, in the Amazon, in the Congo rainforest, in Indonesia, and a number of other hotspots, which are not only fundamental for weather systems globally, but fundamental just to hold on to that biodiversity, protect it. Who are the best people to do that? Obviously, people that have been managing that. Can it be better? Absolutely. Do they need more resources? 100%. And can 800 million make a huge difference? Probably yes. Without strings attached, without any complicated monitoring, reporting, KPI nonsense, but figuring out how to, and not overflow it, like in a way that makes sense. And for sure, some people have thought about how to do that. And then still, we have a crazy amount of money left. So I would try to figure out a system, and we haven't really done it, but I think one of the best answers we ever got was from Gustav. And like, how do we put the podcast mind to work on this? How do we get the people that have listened to many episodes, not all 400, but let's say you listen to half, and how do we know that, which of course we don't, and the guests, and how do we see what they would invest in and then follow them, match them, or maybe invest more, but how do you see what people actually do, not what they say, because what they say is different than what people do, but what would people invest their hard-earned money in it, if they're university professors, if they're farmers, etc. And then we have quite a bit of money to match that or put more in. So what would our community of listeners and people interviewed, what would they put their own money in? And if they do, can we follow as a sort of co-investor? I think that would be a very powerful structure or method. No idea how to do it practically, so that's still a dream. And thus, I don't have €1 billion to put to work, so that's not really an issue.
Yeah, I mean, it will be interesting just to have it and at least try and put it into work. I think it's always interesting, the kind of answer that you give in terms of like putting into indigenous people. It's quite interesting, because for an investor with unlimited amount of money, the first thing they want to know, like, what is the latest technology that I can put into use? But you're sort of going into the other way, sort of appreciating what the indigenous people have been doing.
And there's so much technology there. Like, if you use the Greek word of technology, it's also like there's so much indigenous wisdom and technologies and methods, and that we are barely, because we always put them in a corner of you're underdeveloped or all kinds of nonsense. And now we're starting to slowly figure out, like, actually, probably it's the other way around. And so just to even put a spotlight on that, or even to be able to recognize and reconcile, because what we've done to using a larger we, to indigenous people is horrendous. If you think about, they are 2% left, 3%, and they hold 80% of biodiversity. And just, where did the other 98 go? I mean, we know, but so there's a big piece. And of course, 800 million cannot undo any of that, but we also have, like, it's the cradle of humanity and like biodiversity. Horrible word, but probably one of the most neglected pieces of this whole puzzle.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So I usually have a segment in the podcast. I call it the rapid fire questions. The goal is just to like get people to know a little bit more about you, just in case it didn't come through the podcast. And I think it should be interesting. Are you ready to get started?
I'm ready. Let's go.
So the first question is, when you were a kid, what did you want to be when you grew up?
Pilot.
Second, what's the biggest myth people still have about regenerative agriculture?
The productivity one, so yield. We're all going to starve if we would switch to regen.
Third question, one guest from your 400 plus interviews who completely changed how you see the world.
Russ Conser, founder of Standard Soil, which of course Standard Oil, it's a funny joke towards fossil fuel companies. And he said something very profound, like he was very calm on, I was like, why isn't it going faster, regeneration? Why are people waking up to potential power? And he said, yeah, but the world or nature inevitably goes towards regeneration. And the question is, do we take our role as keystone species? Do we take it? Because otherwise some other life form will do that, because it's inevitable that Earth regenerates, even with all the damage we did. And so the question is more, do we take that role or not? Not that it's going to happen. And I thought that was a very calming and reassuring thought.
Fourth question, if you had to describe regeneration in one word, what will it be?
Connecting.
Okay, fifth question. I would like you to finish this sentence for me. The future of regeneration is?
Everywhere.
Sixth question, what's your favorite meal?
A good plate of pasta, of course, nice grains, etc., organic, obviously. Homemade tomato sauce and a nice glass of wine.
Very good. Seventh question, a book, film, or a podcast that shaped your philosophy the most?
Nassim Nicholas Taleb's Anti-Fragile. Also, he wrote The Black Swan, but I think Anti-Fragile is even more. I mean, the whole series is interesting.
All right. So the eighth question, what's one common piece of advice that regen investors should ignore?
That it's super risky, which is not.
Ninth question, what quote do you find coming back to again and again?
I don't remember who said it, but specifically about farming, but also actually about entrepreneurs in general. You can't be green while you're in the red. So if you're loss making, if your numbers are in the red, you cannot be talking about sustainability, regeneration, etc. Like it has to make, especially if you're on a company, financial sense. Because if you're deep in the red, it's just going to be, you're going to be busy with other things.
All right. Last question. If you could go back and talk to your 18-year-old self, what would you say to him?
Be bolder and more experiments, and of course, don't risk what you can't risk. But I was in a luxury position that I could. I left university and started building companies and experimenting, but produce more, record more, write, film, whatever it is. Probably learn to code. I'm not sure if that's so relevant anymore now with all the coding agents, but produce and put it out there, because the magic of the internet is people find you, and you can find people in the whatever billion people that are online, and experiment, and be strict about it. Like I love the venture studio model, like kill things that don't work. Absolutely don't get stuck on things. And especially when you're younger, you have the luxury. You don't have mortgages, cars, debt, children, all of those things. You have the time to build things, but definitely build, because it's so liberating when you are able, and of course not everyone is, but to build something yourself and have the freedom to choose who to work with, and work with people that give energy.
Pretty good. And so those were 10 questions. And looking forward to our collaboration, just to remind people that we'll be doing a lot more episodes together as well. So the whole point of this is just to highlight some of the amazing people within the African context who are doing an amazing work in the regeneration of the continent. So looking forward to that.
Absolutely. Looking forward to that. And thank you so much for the work you do and for having me on here. It was a pleasure and honor.
So if you enjoyed this podcast, we did an earlier podcast with Koen in his podcast as well. So I think that conversation, you might be interested to get to know a little bit from my end on what else I'm doing in this context. So you should enjoy it as well. So till the next podcast, remember to be organic.